this presentation.
The paper that I'm going to present today is a paper with Armansing and Indra. I don't know if you notice or not, but my name always came up as the last author in the three papers, indicating that maybe I just play a minimal role in the papers, but because of my luck, today Arman is in the US and Radi is in Kalimantan, so I have to present this paper. The outline for my presentation is like this, so I will start with the motivation first, then look more deeply into the background and the basic studies on this issue. Then from that, we will try to develop some conceptual framework. Then we have an idea how we can test the relationship of the three variables, and I will discuss a little bit about the data. Then from that, I will outline the empirical strategy and discuss the result with you. We also did some heterogeneity analysis in the end, and we ended the conclusion. So the motivation for this study basically is that, okay, we now know the impact of inequality on growth, on employment, on employment, and crime. So what else? It must have something to do also with government programs. And in the last 15 years in Indonesia, social protection is a big thing, because after the end of the crisis in 1998. And if we think about one of the main issues in the implementation of the social protection programs, is targeting. Because my study with Pak Sudarno, for example, find that social protection programs are effective only if it is targeted correctly. Effective in the sense that it will increase consumption of the poor and reduce poverty reductions. Inequality comes into the targeting equation because with higher inequality, actually, it is easier to differentiate between the non-poor and the poor. Because one of the reasons, for example, when we go to the field and asking people in villages why this program is not targeted sharply to the poor, because they said that here we are basically similar. What you call as the poor and the non-poor, in reality it's not too different in the daily lives. So in an equal society, it's actually quite difficult to differentiate the non-poor and the poor. When inequality increasing, it becomes more focused who are the non-poor and who are the poor. And a study by Cody, Gross, and Holinot, which review more than basically hundreds of social protection programs in the world, they basically find that indeed in the cross-country analysis, they find that targeting performance is better in countries with higher, with more unequal countries, meaning higher inequality. So okay, that's clear. But when we look deeper into the literature, it turns out the relationship between inequality and targeting is not that linear, because then elite capture comes into play. The idea is that at the local level, when inequality is higher, and especially when the poor is powerless, then elite culture becomes very strong. Then elite culture can strongly distort targeting. So now it's become more messy. So we think, well, this is a good idea for research. So we will look at the relationship between the three variables, inequality, agriculture, and targeting, and we apply to the Indonesian context. And we choose the two largest social protection programs, which are RASKIN and BLT. And in this case, we look at the situations in 2008-2009. We used the 2009. Fortunately, BLT was also run in 2008-2009. So we have we think it's an ideal data. That's the motivations. The background about the program first, about RASKIN. Why we try to contrast between RASKIN and BLT. RASKIN basically is basically has decentralized targeting mechanisms. In this program, Bulog at the time, which was the implementing agency, basically calculates the number of the eligible recipients in each village and allocate rice to the villages based on this number, and distribute the rice to the villages. After the rice comes to the villages, it is the responsibility of the local official, kepala desa and his apparatus to distribute the rice basically. So it is a decentralized targeting, and we have found from many studies which have been done on RASKIN that the result of this, the distribution of RASKIN, is more equal distribution. Basically, the targeting is not very good in RASKIN. BLT, on the other hand, is using more centralized targeting method. It distributes cash to the poor, and the cash is distributed via the local post office. And it has the local official have very limited power on affecting the BLT distribution, except during the data collections period in the PSE 05, which is actually used in both RASKIN and BLT. So this is the data that it used in both programs in 2008-2009, which is the PSE 05, Household Socioeconomic Survey 2005. This is the data used for the targeting of both programs. The steps in this data collection, in the first step, the enumerators from the BTS collects data from various sources, basically from the BKKBN, from property census and everything, and they have a preliminary list of the poor within each village. Then the enumerator will go to the villages, consult the list with the local area unit, the head of local SLS, or usually it's an RT or an RW. Then from that, they have some modification to the list, and the enumerator is supposed to visit all the poor people on the list to verify, and because there is a form that needs to be filled, and based on that form, that they calculate the score for each poor people, and then BPS determine who are the poor which are eligible to receive this. But in practice, this is in ideal, but in practice, the enumerator usually skip the steps in analyzing and visiting all poor households. They think they know the characteristics of the poor, they just give it the form. So, but the data that's used and used in both RASKIN and BLT. So basically, they come from the same database, but the actual implementation become quite different. A little bit about decentralized targeting. So if we look at the literature, it seems that decentralized targeting is considered as the most efficient and effective method for targeting. The reason is because local officials are more accountable than the central government. For example, Alderman from the World Bank argue about this. And also, on the study by Cody Gross and Hodinot, they find that conditional on income level, targeting performance is better in countries with accountable government. So this matches with the other one hypothesis. But there is a downside to decentralized targeting, and the major downside is that the risk by captured by the elites. For example, Galasso and Ravalion find in India, in villages where there is a high land inequality, this inequality in land ownership actually also reflects inequality in power. So the poor become powerless, and then this elite captures happen in these villages. In other cases, Sayers and Dershong, for example, found that agriculture could also happen because of special relationships between some of poor and non-poor people with the local elites, which also could distort targeting. And interestingly, Arojo found that it's not only land inequality but income inequality also positively related with this culture. But a study by Chikako Yamauchi found that it didn't happen in Indonesia during the New Order era. She did the study on the IDP program, the Impres Desa Tertinggal program. She said there was no capture. On the targeting performance in Indonesia, this is basically for the post-reform era after 98, 99, so the GPS to now era. For example, we find that targeting performance is usually inadequate. Yeah. A study by Ben Alton, for example, find that the rasking program suffers leakage up to 18%, and 80% of this leakage comes from the mistargeting. A more recent study by Vivi Agatas and her friends at the World Bank found that elite captures in Indonesia actually happens during the actual distribution phase of the benefit. So based on this literature, we try to understand the relationship between inequality, elite captures, and targeting. First, elite captures occurs when local officials abuse their power to secure their own interest. Basically, and their main own interest is to get elected. And the existence of elite capture could inhibit decentralized targeting from delivering the desired outcomes. Although theoretically, it's the best targeting method. And elite capture is positively associated with inequality level, especially when the local poor are powerless or voiceless also. And inequality actually could give additional power to the elites in affecting the public programs to those people. So how we can explain the possible mechanisms of how the relationship between inequality and elite capture could have consequences on targeting performance? First, higher inequality makes distinction between the poor and non-poor more obvious. But unfortunately, at the same time, this may prompt local officials from abusing their power because they now know who are the poor, who are the non-poor, and they can target their interests accordingly. An incumbent leader who are in power now actually sees the poor as the pool of potential voters. So inequality can lead to a bitter targeting performance because if there is an opportunity, the incumbent will try to make sure that the majority or all the poor get benefits from the program. But if he did that without sacrificing his supporters who are non-poor, then it becomes less clear-cut. And I think that's what we find in our study. So we use, in this study, our unit of observation is a district level, kabupaten kota level, and we use two sources of data, Susenas and Forest from 2009, Codex of 2008 is the latest. The Susunas is for the household socioeconomic variables, and actually Susunas is better than PSA 05 in identifying the beneficiaries because they have consumption data, while PSA only use proxy. For Codex, we use it to for the village variables, but both Susunas and village levels can aggregated at the district level. And the final database in our analysis, we have 465 districts with non-missing variables, and this is the data that we use in the analysis. Some descriptive analysis, just to show you that we have 4 outcome variables with inclusion error of BLT, inclusion error of Raskin, exclusion error of BLT, and exclusion error of Raskin. If we look at the number, actually the error is quite high. Inclusion error in BLT, for example, is about 50%, in Raskin is about 55%. The exclusion error of BLT is 53%, and for Raskin is 55%. Inclusion error is the proportions of the poor, the proportion of the non-poor who receive the benefit. This inclusion error. The exclusion error is the proportion of the poor who did not receive the benefit. These are some, our main independent variables, the Gini ratio, and these are the others, district level variable as the control variable. So on average, the Kabupaten Kota has about 4.29 Gini ratio. About 49% of the household receives Raskin, and 22% receive here. The other are just control variables. So to do the analysis, we tried to mimic how the government target the recipients of both BLT and Raskin using the PSA 05. So basically, we have to standardize per capita expenditure because the value of rupiah across the region actually is different. By standardizing, we try to make the value the same. Basically, so we just divide the nominal per capita expenditure with the ratio of property line in Jakarta with the respective district. That's basically what we did. And after we calculate this standardized per capita expenditure, we rank all households in Indonesia from the poorest to the richest. And we mimic the government program by cutting the bottom 19.1 million household as the eligible household to receive the benefits of both programs, because this is the number that used by the government. And if we look at this diagram here, on the left side here, if the targeting is 100% correct, the figure will be like this. So the poorest 40% will receive the benefit, and the richest 60% will receive nothing. This is basically the targeting, the ideal targeting, or what's supposed to happen when the poorest 30% of household receives the benefit. But the reality is quite different. This is the actual distribution of benefits. This is for BLT, and the red one is for Raskin. We see that along this household desire, there are groups of households which receive both programs. Even at the top 10%, the richest 10% of population, there are some who still receive the benefits. So when we say that the targeting is inadequate, this is the evidence. Okay. So we now try to on targeting outcomes. And remember, I have 4 outcomes here, which is the inclusion errors of BLT and Raskin and exclusion errors of BLT and Raskin, controlled by other variables that might affect components at the district level. And the result is like this. If we look at the inclusion error, if both BLT and Raskin, the coefficients are not significant. On the other hand, for exclusion error, the coefficients are negative and significant. What this means? When it is become more obvious the difference between the non-poor and poor, the local leaders did not try to reduce the non-poor who receives the benefit, but they do try to add more poor people to receive the benefit. This is actually an indirect evidence of architecture, because it shows that the local leader tried to lower the proportion of eligible households not receiving BLT or Raskin, but at the same time tried to keep some of the non-eligible households as the beneficiaries. This is an indication of architecture. If we look at the benefit, the coefficients for BLT is minus 0.55, while for Raskin is minus 0.5, which implies that an indication of higher architecture in Raskin in BLT, because they can only add smaller number of poor people who originally don't receive Raskin to receive Raskin, while for BLT they can add more people, indicating that elite culture is higher in Raskin distribution than in BLT distribution. Does it make sense that Raskin has higher elite culture than BLT? We think so. I think that there are at least 2 reasons for this. First, the distribution method, the targeting method, shows that indeed that the local official have more power in influencing the targeting of Raskin than in BLT. Secondly, the monetary value of the benefit itself is much higher in BLT than in Raskin. So the beneficiaries themselves have more incentive to make sure that the targeting is more correct in BLT than in Raskin. So, but overall, this finding shows that we found that indirect evidence of agriculture in the distribution rate in both programs, although in Raskin is higher. I think that's basically the findings of our studies. Then we do some heterogeneity analysis to see whether this holds in many contexts or not. First, we divide the districts into 2 groups. One is the higher inequality district, and the other one is the low inequality districts. We use the median as the cutting point. If we look at the result, it's basically the same qualitatively, not significant for inclusion error in the high inequality district, and negative and significant exclusion error, and with much higher coefficients and higher for BLT than Raskin. This strengthened our conclusion from the main result. In the low inequality district also the same, significant for inclusion error, but only significant for BLT for exclusion error. So in low inequality districts, the elite culture in Raskin is actually stronger. Yeah? They couldn't even add more poor people to receive the benefit of Raskin. Secondly, we divide the districts by the level of educational attainment. We look at the proportions of population within the district which have senior higher education or more, yeah, and split the district by the median. So high education district and low education And here we find also the same, yeah, basically. Not significant for inclusion error and significant for exclusion error, but now, interestingly, that Raskin has higher coefficients than BLT in the highly educated districts. So when people are more educated, they try to assert their rights to get the benefit. Even in Raskin, they can get higher efficiency. But for the low educated district, there is no significant coefficient for exclusion error, meaning the poor didn't get anything, but actually it increases inclusion error for Raskin. In fact, more non-poor getting more Raskin benefit in the low educated district. If we divide the districts into urban and rural, it becomes more interesting. Yeah? For Raskin, the coefficient for both inclusion error and exclusion errors are not significant, but for BLT, it's both significant. So actually, in urban areas, the elite catcher is smaller than in rural areas. So a rural area has a stronger elite catcher. They even didn't change the distributions. Even when the difference between the poor and non-poor become clear. Yeah, that's the conclusion from this. So in rural areas, only the exclusion error for BLT is significant. The final one, we try to do a sensitivity analysis of the measure of inequality that we use. So far we have used Gini ratio, but in this one we use a new, not new, it's a measure of inequality which is becoming more popular now because it's easier to interpret. It's the so-called Palma ratio. Palma ratio is basically the ratio of income or expenditure, in this case expenditure, between the top 10%, top rich 10%, and the bottom 40% of the population. Fortunately, the results basically the same, the people result. No significant effects on inclusion error, and significant effect negative for exclusion error, and higher in delta in Raskin. So this confirms our findings from using Gini ratio. So to conclude, again, our study finds that higher inequality reduces exclusion error, but has no impact on inclusion error. And BLT has higher inequality elasticity of inclusion error, which is 0.55, while Raskin is only 0.5. And these two are indirect evidence of the existence of elite captures in social protection programs in Indonesia. And in this case, we found that the elite capture is bigger in Raskin than in BLT. So even though theoretically decentralized targeting should deliver the best outcome, in the Indonesian case we find it's the other way around. Because of the existence of elite capture, decentralized targeting does not generate the best results in terms of benefit distribution in social protection program. What are the implications of our findings? I think basically there are two. If you want to have a better targeting performance outcome, it needs at least two efforts. One is we need a special effort to reduce inclusion error. I think that has been very prevalent. Yeah. The proportion of the non-poor who are not eligible, who actually receive the benefit. We should try to reduce this. And secondly, we need stricter supervisions in more equal communities. When inequality is low, actually it requires higher effort in targeting. That's end my presentations. Thank you for